The DOC is the third largest department in state government. It employs over 4,300 people, many of whom may be watching today. The department manages 11 complex prison facilities, funds the supervision of nearly 88,000 people across the state, and incarcerates nearly 8,000 individuals. For your reference, here is a map of the 11 facilities representing a footprint of over 75 million square feet of facility space across the state. The work of the DOC is not siloed, and as we address the needs and risks of individuals incarcerated in Minnesota, it is important to recognize that the policy and investments we request are not focused simply on the probation and prison administration. Because rehabilitation requires a focus on all aspects of a person's lives, in many areas of the governor's budget recommendation, you'll see interagency efforts. That is particularly true in corrections. Because we want to produce the best outcomes related to public safety, we have robust and transformative interagency proposals in the areas of housing stability, addiction recovery and successful reentry, employment navigation and support, along with secondary and higher education investments. Due to the size and detail of the request before you, we would ask that you review the full governor's recommendation for corrections and the fact sheets on many of the proposals. The fact sheets are in your packets and also linked on various slides in the presentation. Members, there's a lot to say about the challenges facing the Department of Corrections, and I need to put this in context. In the past few days, make that picture even more compelling. The Department of Corrections operates and is staffed 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Work in corrections is among the most challenging work across the state enterprise, and the work is not without risk. Just this week, several staff at both the Oak Park Heights and Stillwater prisons were assaulted. Staff suffered broken facial bones, concussions, black eyes, cuts, and scrapes. I want to be direct here. We must do better by our staff. Investments in our corrections system have lagged behind other public safety sectors. As prison admission once again spiked, maintaining competitive pay is essential. It's essential for our staff, essential for their families, and it is importantly essential to the state's safety and the people we serve. Like many public safety sectors, the DOC is facing a staffing crisis, requiring forced overtime just to keep the facilities running and secure. Far too often, our staff report for a shift not knowing if they're going to work an 8-hour day or a 16-hour day. The Department of Corrections is 97% funded by the state's general fund. It is almost entirely dependent upon the legislature, on you, for adequate funding. For investments to improve working conditions, the physical environment, compensation, and evidence-based practices and programs that will produce better public safety outcomes for our state. The DOC has some of the most archaic and antiquated technology and data systems in the state, yet we are expected and should be tracking outcomes that directly relate to safety and well-being of our staff and the people we serve, and the public safety outcomes for our community. It is the nature of human beings that out of sight often means out of mind. In the case of those committed to our state prisons, I literally mean out of sight. Behind those massive brick walls or massive front fencing structures topped with razor wire, the people who live in them and work in them are often hidden. In the most basic sense, our prisons are the failures of our society, unaddressed traumas, impossible challenges for our government. Whether it be the failures of education or child welfare, mental health access, economic opportunity disparity, or racist systems, our correction system is left to address these challenges and expected to produce better outcomes, oftentimes with insufficient resources. Don't get me wrong. People need to be held to account for violations of laws and the harm done to other people. We know this. Staff do this work in service to our state and the people committed to our prisons, must daily walk into or live in the buildings that have tens of millions of dollars in unaddressed maintenance needs. But in them, staff provide and residents receive health care, education, work opportunity, chemical dependency treatment, mental health services, and a host of other programming at a time when there is rightful concern about community safety. Now is the time to invest in a system that must include effective law enforcement, properly resourced prosecution, defense, judicial services, but we cannot forget what happens behind those walls and those fences. Madam Chair and members, we have been at this precipice before as it relates to prison population. The choice becomes clear. Build a new prison, a $1 billion proposition and construction costs alone, not to mention the $50 million plus to operate it on an annual basis. Or make significant investments. The governor and lieutenant governor's proposed budget for corrections is, as I said, considerable. But it is grounded in the belief that we can make a difference, a recognition of the fact that accountability and rehabilitation are not distinct political ideologies. They are, in fact, two sides of the same coin. So let me talk about the opportunities reflected in this budget. We have an enormous opportunity. This committee is tasked with funding the systems of government that support our state's public safety, law enforcement, criminal investigations, corrections, and victim support services. You've heard me say it before, 95% of those who are in our prisons will return to their communities. As a state, we have to, simply must, prepare them in the most effective way if we want to reduce victimization and criminal activity. Effective intervention also reduces the likelihood of generational system involvement. Members, we're at a crucial time and a critical time in the history of the Minnesota Department of Corrections. We can pave a new evidence-based, data-driven path forward for a safer Minnesota, or we can maintain the status quo. In line with the DOC's mission, the governor has recommended a transformative budget, investments in public safety, facility security, support of our staff, all focused on a more rehabilitative correction system that will serve our state for decades to come. So let's get into it. Turning to the most significant of our requests, the governor is recommending $144 million in the next biennium to maintain the DOC's current level of service delivery, and $10 million to account for the basic need forecasted in the rise of the state's prison population. These funds will maintain our current staffing complement and baseline operations of the department. Again, we recognize the significance of the amount requested. However, it is foundational to our operations of the agency. Context around the request is important. First, there was no supplemental budget last session, something the DOC has historically relied upon to relieve budget pressures based on its compensation-heavy budget and the shifting cost of managing such a large operation. We have all seen and experienced the impact of inflation on our basic needs, of which the DOC provides in large scale. Food costs, utility costs, and supplies have all impacted our costs and operations. Very importantly, due to the impact of COVID-19 pandemic in reducing the state's prison population, the DOC took a significant budget cut in 2021. The cut eliminated programs and services across the agency that must see reinvestment to accommodate the now rising population from the COVID backlog. Please be aware that there is a shift in how the legislature must now consider the cost of increased incarceration. In previous biennia, the forecasted cost of incarceration was built into the base budget, similar to the education formula. That changed recently, where policymakers must now proactively consider these costs and appropriate funding as a budget request. The costs in this budget category, if not funded, will create a budget deficit for the agency. Members, as you can see here, as the court processes through the backlog of criminal cases through the pandemic, our prison population will rise significantly, back to levels seen 4 or 5 years ago. The current capacity of the DOC will be exceeded in as few as 2 years. The request before you includes per diem costs to reflect that projection. This number reflects a single bunking at Stillwater as recommended by the OLA in their 2020 report on prison safety. Note that the Rush City facility remains double bunked despite the fact that it was built as a single bunking facility. And the women's facility in Shakopee was built to house just over 300, but currently, as of today, incarcerates 546. Without investments in rehabilitation and reducing recidivism, we will reach our capacity, leading to that less effective and much more costly solution of a new prison. Again, a $1 billion proposition. We've covered this, much of this, but it is also important to consider the constitutional obligation of the state to provide health care and a standard of living for those who are incarcerated under state law. Moving on to the budget needs within the facilities, we'll start with the tools and systems to help recruit and retain our staff. Members, on many of these slides, I encourage you to read the attached fact sheets provided in your packets and linked to the slides. Here you'll see a number of investments requested to support the dedicated staff of the department, from professional development to staff wellness and support. And I just highlight our hiring efforts. In calendar year 2021, the DOC hired 245 corrections officers and retained just 136, or 44%. In calendar year 2022, we hired 620 corrections officers and we retained 357, or 58%. It's notable that the number of DOCs, authorized strength for the DOC's corrections officer, is just shy of 2,100. Moving on to the budget request for health services. It probably goes without saying, but we don't get to choose who is sentenced to prison. Regardless of whether that person has cancer, HIV, or hepatitis C, we are constitutionally mandated and morally obligated to provide safe, timely, and high-quality medical care to everyone. About 8% of our population is considered severely mentally ill, and 4% are insulin dependent, 4 times the rate of people outside of prison. 80 to 100 people are treated annually for hepatitis C, and at any given time, we treat about 160 individuals who are HIV positive, requiring monthly medications. Our patients are very high need, very often admitted to the DOC with comorbidities. This is true not just for physical ailments, but for behavioral health conditions as well. Often, they have not had access to primary care in the community, and their in-prison intake physical may be, in some cases, the first physical they've ever had in their life. Our population is aging just like our communities. We are seeing increased numbers of people with dementia, COPD, coronary artery disease, and hypertension. The increased use of overtime by nursing staff in our facilities has grown exponentially. Between 2017 and 2022 ranges from 120% increase at the Red Wing facility, 166% increase at the Faribault facility, to a 274% increase at Rush City. This leads to hundreds of thousands of dollars in additional costs, not to mention staff burnout. Members, the request for body-worn cameras in our corrections and intensive supervised release agents is one we have brought forward previously, and it was in response to the 2020 OLA audit on facility safety. The recommendation was recently echoed in the DOC Ombuds report on sexual assaults in prisons. We have the ability to provide more accountability and transparency in our prisons for the sake of safety, of the well-being of our staff and the population. And body-worn cameras are an effective and proven way of doing this. There are numerous needs for investments in the safety and operations of the state's facilities. To highlight just a few, similar to prisons across the country, we are seeing an alarming rate of drugs coming into our correctional facilities, oftentimes through the mail, in very sophisticated ways, like soaking drugs and greeting cards and other paper products. The introduction of these drugs result in assaults and overdoses. And after an extensive pilot study to look at different methods of preventing the influx of drugs through the mail, we are requesting about $500,000 to invest in mail scanning technology. Additionally, the core function of food services in our prisons is experiencing a staffing crisis that's unprecedented. Stabilized food services is critical to safe and secure and healthy operations of a state prison. And you'll see a significant request in the governor's recommendation to ensure adequate staffing levels. We are requesting a $1 million a year ongoing to meet the needs and complying with the Federal Prison Rape Elimination Act requirements, and to ensure that DOJ grants are not reduced in our capacity to comply with these important and critical safety standards. Additionally, we seek funds to update technology and ensure effective communication throughout the facilities. We are requesting $1.5 million a year and ongoing to upgrade the department's armor radios. Members, you have heard from our Fugitive Apprehension Unit a couple weeks ago on a policy bill to clarify their authority and allow them to assist other law enforcement agencies. The unit is in need of additional capacity to keep up with the increased demands of outstanding warrants. Adding officers is a way for the DOC to ensure accountability in our system and keep our community safe. Over time, warrants have increased, now running between 400 and 500 people subject to an active warrant at any given time. We would like to drive this number down significantly, thus this request. Moving on to another budget recommendation of the governor on community supervision. And you'll hear more about this topic in the future, so I won't spend the time on it that it deserves today. But please know that this funding is a central priority for the DOC and one we are dedicated to in partnership with counties across our state to adequately and equitably fund the state's probation and supervision systems. This includes a $42 million a year increase for the provision of supervision and probation services, $2.75 million to tribal governments who to provide supervision supports to system-involved people, and $18.7 million in grants for community programming and innovative services to meet gaps across our state. Moving on to investments and how Minnesota can become a leader in evidence-based service delivery, tracking outcomes, and ensuring transparency in our work. Members, you have seen this request from 2022 and the need remains critical. The DOC's data management system and underlying technology foundation are incredibly antiquated. Staff routinely use spreadsheets to track data, provide written reports for documentation, and fax machines to share critical information. This one-time funding request to be developed or spread out over 4 years has two main components. First, it will overhaul the DOC's data management system to bring them in line with modern standards and efficiencies and data collections. And we have a short recorded testimony from Captain Chris Mitchell to help explain the need for this investment.
My name is Chris Mitchell, and I'm a captain for the Department of Corrections. I am based out of Fairville, Minnesota. My name is Chris Mitchell.
Can you all hear that?
No. Is the audio through the system?
I don't know.
It is? Okay.
Can I turn off the computer?
Yeah, we'll just roll with it.
And I'm a captain for the Department of Corrections. I am based out of Fairville, Minnesota, and I'm coming up on.
I'm sorry. Well enough, friend.
It's just not, I think,
Yeah, I just need to get this
slide.
slide back up.
It worked so good when we practiced it.
For the service with the DOC. There's several, and we'd be here a long time to just grab all of them, but
I'm wondering, Commissioner, in the interest of time, if we
Yeah.
can just share a link for this video to members and
Absolutely.
then post it on our website.
Yeah.
All right, great.
So I'll proceed. So the second part of the investment will take this updated data management system at the DOC and link it to a newly created public safety data hub. This will provide real-time information across our system and to increase public safety outcomes and data-driven decision-making. The creation of this data portal will provide a central uniform tool for law enforcement, supervision, and probation agents, the courts, and the DOC, with all having access and sharing the same data. This will be provided more directly and efficiently using 21st century data tools and supports. The governor is also recommending creation of an evidence-based practices unit at the DOC to evaluate the effectiveness of all aspects of secure confinement, treatment, programming, and community supervision, and to maintain research on best practices across the field of corrections, and to ensure that the state is investing resources.
Information sharing, we currently still use fax machines.
No, it won't stop.
This is like a reflection of the DOC technology.
On the IT request. On the IT request.
The evidence-based practices unit will oversee the implementation of what works, how we keep our facilities safe and secure, what programming and how treatment programming is provided, and ensuring the most effective methods of reducing recidivism and revocation while individuals are on community supervision. It will also be responsible for providing quality assurance on programming and supporting statewide training to all DOC staff. Next, accountability and transparency and oversight must be central to how Minnesota approaches public safety. Yet investments in data analysis, oversight, implementation of policy and procedures, and equity, access, and inclusion have all fallen short. For example, the DOC currently has just 2 staff dedicated to equity, access, and inclusion. We need these people to make sure that we are in alignment with the values and diversity of our state and comply with all federal access requirements. Additionally, the DOC is an agency governed overwhelmingly by policy, yet we have less than 2 full-time staff to analyze, oversee, and update over 470 policies. These investments will help ensure robust, effective, efficient oversight and accountability of systems, policies, and services. Moving to the final segment of our presentation, the following investments are in the area of rehabilitation. You have already heard the central tenet of our to the budget recommendation, the Minnesota Rehabilitation and Reinvestment Act, or MRRA. MRRA incentivizes people for completing transformative programming by reducing their incarceration and supervision time. The proposal also reinvests savings in system efficiencies and improvements going forward. As you consider increased investments in rehabilitative services, please keep in mind that if we do not bend the curve of recidivism and rehabilitation, there are additional considerations that we will need to face, and that is adding more capacity to our state's prison systems in the coming years. As a reminder, the DOC is shifting the focus and organization of the department to a person-centered approach. Simply put, this approach organizes and matches evidence-based programs and services targeted at the needs of individuals and addressing their risk factors while they're with us. Research tells us this is what works. To effectively fulfill this shift, resources for rehabilitation must follow. Each of these data points on this slide reflect a unique and important challenge to our work and yours. And I hope you will keep them front of mind as you consider making decisions about the Department of Corrections budget throughout this session. We have a video here again, but we're going to try one more time if we can, Madam Chair. Just.
When we use the word rehabilitation, like when a judge sentences someone to the Department of Corrections, they're sending them there for this rehabilitative process. And currently the way it's set up, there is no positive reinforcement for actually joining the programming. So us incentivizing the programming and giving resources and money to this space to incentivize the program, it is one of the ways that we are actually contributing to a safer Minnesota. And for the average incarcerated person, it will give meaning to their days. It will give meaning to the phone calls to their family. It'll give meaning to the visits from their family, because it's a different type of check-in. Hey, how was the programming going? So every time you complete another programming, your family knows you're taking a step closer to your own dreams, and you're also taking a step closer to them. But most people who end up in prison because they were, anti the rules, and following the rules they feel like never got them nothing good. So if it was to incentivize the programs, even for the people who don't believe in the stuff, muscle memory. You go to the barbershop enough times, you're bound to get your hair cut. So if we get people on the track of, I do good, good things happen for me. I do good, good things happen for me. It would absolutely shift rehabilitation, and people would be saying, hey, actually, so if I do good, good things happen for me. And that would turn rehabilitation.
I think the DOC does a pretty good job in terms of the breadth of possible, there's lots of different programs, right? Unfortunately, lots of those programs have a very limited capacity because of funding and other things like that. And the more that we can expand some of those programs, the more that the more that we can reduce the wait times to get into those programs, and the more people are going to be successful. So today I'm speaking to you from the #1 criminology program, in the country that consists the University of Maryland Department of Criminology and Criminal Justice is consistently ranked as the #1 criminology program in the country, if not amongst the top in the world. And I'm here because I finished my PhD at the University of Minnesota. But before that, I started my educational journey in St. Cloud Prison. It was in St. Cloud when I first began taking college courses that eventually led me to go, after I was released, it led me to community college, where I finished there, transferred to the U, finished my undergrad, and then finished my PhD. But if it wasn't for the opportunities, the opportunity to take college courses while I was incarcerated, I never would be in the position where I am today. I have no idea where I would be otherwise, but I know that I wouldn't be here without that opportunity. And so when I look at the transformative possibilities of education, I obviously think back to my own experience, but I also think back to the experience of many of the other people I saw go through these programs, and how the opportunities, the chance to be in one of these classes really was like a light switch for many of them, realizing, there is another way, right? And I think that the more that we as a society, the more that obviously the legislature can support these types of programs, the better off we're going to all be in terms of, our communities and obviously the state of Minnesota.
A lot of times, when people are being reentered into the community, we have to focus on those stability factors for these people. They might not have housing, food, clothing, and so our focus gets put on those things before it gets put on rehabilitation, before we can even work with somebody in promoting that change and increasing community safety.
And so it's important to fund people that are starting fresh so that they're not getting into different mental health circumstances that can happen, whether it's anxiety, depression. How am I going to do this? I might as well just go back to my old ways because no one's going to give me the opportunity anyway. So I'll just do what I know. It's important to fund them because we spend so much money keeping them in, and an appropriate fund can help people stay out and become productive, which is our motto in Minnesota as it relates to rehabilitation. We work with the human population because they're human beings. I'm a firm believer, and I work very strongly with following the law and respecting the law and accountability for that. So in no way do I want this to be something that people get to do and act and behave how they choose, and we need to fund that. I don't think that that's the message we need to give, but we do need to say to those that have been in prison or are coming out or don't want to re-enter that we're willing to do something different, because life happens to everybody.
Because, you know, a lot of people that are getting out have lost a sense of identity, lost values and things that have been taught to them just due to, you know, drug use, living in survival mode. And, you know, you forget to really work on that healing space that Indigenous people, you know, have within their own lives, you know. And so I think that it's just really important that we include that when we're transitioning people back into community.
I think especially for Native American men, if they have a safe place to come home to that provides support, that provides them with culture, I don't see them failing. I see them exceeding. I feel that I see them, you know, walking with confidence and believing in themselves. And I think that's really important, because these are the men in our community. These are our fathers, our brothers, our uncles. When they're coming home, it's hard for them to even find a place to come home to because of the limited amount of housing.
Over the last year and a half or so, we've had to create wait lists for our clients. We've had to close down locations or different groups that we're offering because we don't have the staff to provide the service. Not that we don't have the clients that need the service, but we don't have the staff to provide the service. An increase in funding would help us be able to treat more clients. Our wait lists could be reduced in size. We would be able to expand the breadth of services that we provide. For example, many of the services that we are required to perform under contract or for the courts or for probation are things that health insurance does not cover. And so that increased funding is really needed to bridge the gap between what a client can afford to pay us for services, what their health insurance may cover, and then what we're actually being required to do as a sex offender treatment provider.
We work with a population that struggles to find supportive services, struggles to find stable housing where they would like to live, struggles to find work. We are not able to coordinate case management for our clients because insurance doesn't reimburse for it. And we just don't have the funds. And we really need people with lived experience to help people find stable housing, help coordinate fair chance employment opportunities, do some leadership and education around that, and also just help with other supportive services.
These people are our brothers, our neighbors, our friends. We've demonized them, right? Because they've done some terrible things, absolutely. But we've demonized them and othered them in a way that really isn't accurate. They are just like us in so many ways. They have made terrible choices and they've caused a lot of harm, but that doesn't have to define the rest of their life. We can help make the rest of their life look a lot differently, and that's what we're here to do.
I don't know how we can continue to do what we're doing without any assistance, because again, we can't do our jobs, what we are set to do to work with these clients and help rehabilitate them and get them the skills that they need to be successful when we're having to continuously focus on stability factors. I know funding is always a sore topic with everybody. Everybody's, always faces, budget, cuts and, wondering, okay, what is least important and what is most important, though it is all important. And I know how difficult it can be, but these people are in our community. And we should do whatever we can to help them start on a successful venture when they're released.
Madam Chair, members, the perspectives provided all relate to holistic budget requests that we have put forward. A significant portion of the budget request is in education, both secondary and higher ed. Just last year, the federal government opened up Pell eligibility for incarcerated individuals, creating enormous opportunities to open up higher education for those in prison, but we need the space, the staff, and the technology to meet that opportunity. This request also invests significantly in ABE, adult basic ed, and special education teachers and staffing capacity to meet the needs of that population and increase positive outcomes upon release. You heard the importance of this investment from others, so I won't belabor the point, but the bottom line is stable housing is a critical component of successful reentry. Housing is cited first and often as the most significant barrier to successful community reintegration. Public safety demands that these individuals reintegrate successfully into communities and not committing further crime. Yet according to the 2021 homelessness legislative report, 1,128 individuals released from prison were released into homelessness. Of those individuals, 57% were Black, Indigenous, or other persons of color. This investment provides supports, resources, and culturally appropriate options for individuals reentering communities facing homelessness. To be very clear, the politics around sex offending and sex offender treatment can be difficult, but the benefits couldn't be more clear. Adequate funding for the grant program to increase successful treatment completion rates and decrease victimization, and to ensure that individuals are not sent back to prison simply because they could not afford treatment is what this investment is about. We have an opportunity to invest in this critical resource need, and I urge you to support this funding. Preserving strong bonds with family while a person is incarcerated leads to more sustained community ties, promotes rehabilitation, and reduces recidivism. Studies repeatedly find a significant link between family contact and success when returning home. As a reminder from a previous slide, 73% of those in prison are parents. 1 in 6 in Minnesota prisons had a parent that was incarcerated. In fact, it was the most prevalent adverse childhood experience. 40% of children in adult foster care have an incarcerated parent. Yet Minnesota does not have a dedicated resource for family support and stabilization services. The creation of this unit will provide a centralized resource for families and help connect community organizations who provide services and programming that strengthen bonds between incarcerated people and their families. And importantly, the governor's recommendation also invests $2 million to eliminate or reduce the cost of phone calls and video visits. There is significant community support for this change, and the time has come to stop charging incarcerated individuals and their families to keep in contact with their support networks. The budget also has requests around reentry targeted at increasing success of individuals as they rejoin their communities when the stakes are most high. These investments focus on substance use disorder release planning, providing Narcan kits upon release, connecting Native American men with culturally specific programming, and creating a peer support pilot for individuals being released from prison. And the Pathways to Employment Program, a proposal that's reflected in House File 505, carried by Representative Newer, which you'll hear later today, you'll hear more about. Finally, Chair Moeller and members, if there is one thing I would like you to take away from our time today is this, that 95% of those in our prisons will return to neighborhoods and communities across the state. Because of this, we must ensure that those in our care, custody, and control, and under our supervision, have access to services and supports they need, because the safety of our state depends upon it. With that, Chair Moeller, I will stand for any questions you or the committee may have.
Thank you, Commissioner. That was an excellent presentation.